Dr. Warner, I saw you yesterday morning, and you said you weren't too impressed with the initial press reports you were reading about this repeal and replace legislation. I don't think that you're any happier now than when I last talked to you, are you?
Oh my goodness, where do we begin? Howie, if you can see on your webcam here, I've got this 66-page document here that came out yesterday. And it was put out by the Energy and Commerce Committee, their healthcare subcommittee. And this is supposedly one of the components of Obamacare repeal and replace. But what I'm calling it is 66 pages of toilet paper. This is horrible. I've heard some people describing it as Obamacare light. That's not correct at all. I call this Obamacare amended. This does not, at least this portion of it, I assume, and I think we're led to believe that there are some other portions that are going to be cobbled together. But the way this reads, and I read every page of this, every line of this twice, and the way this reads, it actually reads very much like Obamacare for those of you who have actually read it. I've read it several times.
That would be nobody has read that, including the people who voted on it, as we all know.
Well, actually, like as I said, I read it, Obamacare a couple of times, and this reads exactly like Obamacare. It refers, it's in such political speak, legalese, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. It wouldn't make sense to most people. It's not written in plain English. It basically refers back and harkens back to prior laws that have already been passed. And then it says, go to page 24 of law XYZ and change paragraph 7 to read, and then blah, blah, blah. So what this tells me is that there is no intention to repeal Obamacare, that there is every intention to keep Obamacare intact and then just have some of these amendments to tweak it. This is a disaster. I think if President Trump supports this and things like this coming forward and does not veto it, first of all, I can't imagine that he won't veto such things.
Well, he
but
said,
if he does,
Dr. Warner, he tweeted out already today, that he supports the bill. He thinks it's great. He met with those guys. They had a photo op at the White House. You've seen that. And then he tweeted out and said, "Don't worry. I know people have concerns, but this is part one of a 3-part plan." That's what he said. Like buying across state lines. That's going to be handled down the road.
Yeah, so I disagree entirely, and I hope he's just saying that to get along with people, and that ultimately he won't support this kind of thing. This portion of what may be coming just deals with Medicaid, so it is certainly not a comprehensive plan. But I will reiterate, and I think most physicians would agree, and most physicians in the Senate and the Congress would agree. We need complete repeal of Obamacare. We do not need replacement, just complete repeal at this time, and a pause, and then to potentially consider some future legislation. And I must say that time is of the essence. A fact that many people may not be aware of is that most commercial insurance companies begin to form their policies and plans for the subsequent calendar year in the April-May timeframe. So that's almost upon us. So they're going to need some direction on how to formulate their plans for 2018. And if something isn't done quickly, and I mean repeal Obamacare, then there'll be no guidance for how to form these plans for next year. And that means that if Obamacare is not repealed within the next month or two, that we will be stuck with Obamacare no matter what.
Well,
throughout all of next year,
as you know, they have a pretty big margin in the Republican House, but they can only lose 21 votes, and they have the House Freedom Caucus, which is really down on this. They had their own press conference earlier in the day. We took some of it live on the show. Senator Rand Paul met with them. As you know, he's not a member of the House. He's a member of the Senate, but he's an ophthalmologist. He's from Kentucky. And he said exactly what you said, which is what the House Freedom Caucus said, which is first you have to repeal this thing. You have to just wipe it off the table and start over again rather than trying to patch it up. I mean, for instance, Dr. Peter Warner, what is this thing about, well, we're not going to have any more subsidies. We're going to have tax credits. What the hell is the difference between a subsidy and a tax credit? The way I read it, they're still writing checks to people who don't work. I mean, this is another giant entitlement. They've already budgeted $100 billion more. And Paul Ryan has been quoted as the speaker has been quoted as saying, "Well, this will bend the cost curve." How the hell do you bend the cost curve down when you're appropriating another $100 billion? And we all know that's just the beginning.
You're absolutely right about that, Howie. You know, there's a few facts that I'm sure your listeners are not necessarily aware of because it's not been in the news much at all. Do you know that in December 2016, there was something very similar to this, and as I'm defining it as an amendment to Obamacare, it was called the 21st Century Cures Act. And so this was a $6.3 billion spending bill that was tacked onto and modified Obamacare. In sometime in 2015, there was something called MACRA, that's an acronym, and that was a bill that was passed that entitles Medicare and HHS to basically manipulate the entire healthcare system to one of their goals, I believe, is to drive all private practice physicians out of business and put the healthcare system in control of major hospital organizations and major insurance companies. So there are things that have been going on in the past couple of years that we're all distracted by focusing on Obamacare. And this current work that came out yesterday is supposed to be inspired by something called A Better Way that has been promoted by Speaker Paul Ryan.
Better Way. That's one of those. That's one of those things. If they say it's like the Affordable Care Act, right? It means it's not affordable. A better way means it's not a better way.
Yeah, and if you go on, there's a couple of websites that show a YouTube video of Paul Ryan say, it's nice music in the background. He's got all these pretty words to describe wonderful things about free market, and then you read this crap, and it's all about how the government just wants to find another way to take over and ruin the healthcare system. So it is not a better way. The only better way is to get government out of healthcare and to completely repeal Obamacare without replacement. The couple of things that also, one other thing I want to bring out that is mentioned in this new proposed legislation is they allude to something called Medicare demonstration projects. This is something I've been wanting to talk to your listeners about. Most people don't know what this is. What is a Medicare demonstration project? This is whereby the federal government gets to take at random, not at random, their own decree, a certain segment of the Medicare population and experiment with them like the proverbial laboratory rats and guinea pigs. But they do it without any informed consent. They do it without what's called IRB approval. So the kinds of experiments that doctors and PhD scientists, the kind of regulations and constraints that we would be subject to in order to, quote unquote, experiment on people, the government and the Medicare, through the Medicare system, is exempt from all that. So, for example, what do I mean by this? That they could say, well, all of a sudden, everybody in the left half of Iowa who needs a knee joint replacement has to use brand XYZ, and everybody in the other half has to use brand ABC, and we will not pay for anything else. Now, that's just not right. And this is going on every day through the Medicare system.
How about the fact, too, that again, I want to mention the Cadillac plans, because some people have Cadillac health care plans. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, Doctor, originally they were supposed to start this onerous tax on Cadillac health care plans in 2014, but there was an election year. So they bumped it down to 2016. Now, then they bumped it to 2020, and now they're going to bump it down to 2025. And it seems to me, being the cynic that I am, that they're just trying to buy the cooperation or the the silence of the big unions, the big trade unions. We're not going to screw your members by putting this 40% tax on their health care plans, but you don't say anything about this. I mean, there's a payoff to all the special interest groups here in this legislation, isn't there? Except for the patients and the physicians and the healthcare people.
You know, absolutely, and I'm so glad you brought that up. I have in front of me 2 letters, and again, the public is not aware of these, or most likely not aware of these. There's a letter dated January 25th, 2017, and it was sent and addressed to President Trump and Vice President Pence, and it is signed by, I don't know, 100, 150 various organizations, mostly big hospital groups, big pharmaceutical companies, biotechnology companies, insurance companies, all of the organizations that are making hundreds of millions and billions of dollars as middlemen and third parties in between the patients and the doctors off the healthcare system, particularly off the Medicare system. And so it's a letter directly to President Trump, explaining how it would be in their best interest to continue this and that aspect of Medicare and Obamacare and et cetera. But in addition, there are a couple of organizations that I think the public, patients, and particularly doctors need to be aware of and start supporting. One of them is called the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. Another one is called the Association of Independent Doctors. Another one is called Docs for Patient Care. Now, these organizations are organizations that go far beyond anything that the AMA, American Medical Association, has done in recent years, or any other medical association is doing currently. These and other similar organizations are trying to promote the protection of the doctor-patient relationship.
I'm going to guess, Doctor, that those organizations you just mentioned don't have as much money as the 150 groups that you mentioned from big pharma, big hospitals, big insurance, et cetera, et cetera. You guys better raise some money big time if you want to be players in D.C.
Exactly. Well, they wrote their own rebuttal letter dated February 21st, 2017, and you can probably go to one of their websites and find the content of the letter. But again, it was refuting the claims in those big organizations that stand to profit from government interference, and it was basically trying to get the attention of President Trump to obviously, you just said it. We don't have the money. Patients and doctors organizations do not have the money to pay for the ears of the politicians and the president like these other organizations. However, our voices are far more important in terms of health care than all of the other lobbyists.
Okay, I got to hold you there. Dr. Warner, but hold up your book again. If people want to read more about this, you go into a lot of these issues in The Art of American Healthcare by Dr. Peter Q. Warner. And he's a neurologist in Wellesley, Massachusetts. You can order the book at Amazon.com or get it in fine bookstores everywhere. Thanks for being with us on this very newsy day when it comes to healthcare. Thank you, Dr. Warner.